Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the AIPG Lunch and Earn webinar series for November. I appreciate all of you coming today. I just want to give you a couple of nuts and bolts things. First off, if you need a certificate for CEUs, please put your name in the chat and we'll make sure that we get that out to you. Second, just note that the Lunch and Earn will not meet in December. We typically meet the last Tuesday of the month. That would put us between Christmas and New Year's, so we're going to take December off. We'll be back in January with a talk from Abani Samal about the global nature of the minerals industry and kind of looking at the global nature of geology in general. Today, I am really pleased to introduce Reno Pressacco as our AIPG Lunch and Earn speaker. Reno is going to talk to us about the Canadian reporting system. He's a consulting mineral resource geologist with SLR Consulting as associate principal geologist. He has a master's degree from McGill University with over 36 years of experience in mineral exploration, mine development and production, and as a general consultant to the mining industry. Reno's had a very successful career identifying economic potential primarily in gold deposits, where he's been part of a group that accounted for the production of about 500,000 ounces of gold. More recently, he's been part of crafting the CIM Mineral Exploration and Best Practices Guidelines and the Mineral Resource and Mineral Reserves Best Practices Guidelines. He received the Robert Elver Award in 2020. Reno is also a member of the CIM Mineral Resources and Mineral Reserves Committee, the Prospectors and Developers Convention Organizing Committee, and he's part of the United Nations Expert Group on Resource Management, where he is a member of the Minerals Working Group that's under the auspices of the United Nations Economic Commission on Europe. Reno, it is my pleasure to introduce you. I really look forward to hearing more about mineral resource and reserve estimation and reporting under the Canadian system. It's all yours.
Thank you, Aaron. And let me take a moment to thank AIPG for allowing me the opportunity to speak to everyone today. Good morning, good afternoon. Just a quick note to say, express my thanks. Begin by expressing my thanks to my colleagues for helping me pull these slides together and helping me to increase and improve my understanding. And also to thank SLR Consulting for support in pulling these slides together and giving this presentation. I also want to make a note that the discussions, thoughts, and opinions presented today are those of my own only, my own understanding based on the subject matter. So just a quick agenda here. We'll start with a review of the basic components regarding the preparation and disclosure of mineral resource, mineral reserve estimation. So that's a bit of a mouthful. So instead of saying mineral resource, mineral reserve, we'll just say MRMR from now on. We'll move on to a discussion of the Canadian system, in which we make a distinction between the practice of MRMR estimates versus the disclosures of the results. We'll then move on to a brief discussion of the CIM Best Practices Guidelines. We'll look at some guidance examples from the Best Practices Guidelines and end with a few sources of additional information for additional questions resulting from the BP Guidelines. And then if we have time at the end, we'll take some questions. So we'll begin with components of the mineral resource, mineral reserve estimation and disclosure. So we'll spend a few minutes on this slide. This is a pretty key concept to everything that follows, in that the preparation and disclosure of MRMR estimates there's three parts to it. There's three stages. Stage one, or the beginning stage, are the definitions. And these are just what they are. They're basic definitions. What is the definition of a mineral resource? What's the definition of a mineral reserve? What's the definition of a feasibility study? Those sorts of things. We've all seen them. After the definitions comes stage two. This is the actual practice. These are all the steps involved in preparing MRMR estimates according to the definitions or in compliance with the definitions. But that's not disclosure yet. Disclosure is the third step. And the third step is reporting of results. So there we have three main stages in the entire process. We begin with definitions, move through practice, move through the preparation, and end up with reporting of results to the public domain. So regarding the definitions, there are a number of groups, documents in the world now that have MRMR definitions and reporting standards. Generally, they belong to CRISCO, the Committee for Mineral Reserves International Reporting Standards, so CRISCO for short. And I think I counted there's 13 or 14 countries represented here. So each of these groups have pretty much adopted they're not exactly the same, very similar definitions in respect of MRMR's estimation. And each of these have also developed a standard reporting codes or guidance. So this is the stage 3 part of it. Come on. So each of the national reporting codes for all those different countries, they all have their own. We'll see examples in a minute. But they all have the same basic elements as the CRISCO International Reporting Template. And here's a copy of the title page there. And another key concept to understand here is that these documents are exactly that. They're reporting templates. It's a very, very key concept to understand. Reporting templates. They focus on how to disclose results to the public domain. They also provide definition standards. They focus on disclosure to the public domain, but they don't necessarily provide much in the way of guidance. We'll talk about that in a minute. So each of these national reporting codes for all the different countries and the CRISCO template here contain a number of standard definitions. So here's a brief list from the CRISCO template. So what's the definition of a mineral? What's the definition of a public report? What's the definition of a competent person or qualified person in Canada? But there you see there are also definitions for mineral resources and mineral reserves. So most of the definitions internationally are similar. They're not identical, there's slight differences, but they're all very similar. So here's an example of what a definition is. So here's the definition of a mineral resource. We've all seen this language. A mineral resource is a concentration or occurrence of solid material of economic interest, and so on. So understand that this is a definition of what a mineral resource is. This does not provide any guidance for how to prepare a mineral resource estimate and does not provide any guidance on the disclosure, right? So here's an example of similar definition standards from one of the member countries of CRISCO. This happens to be the CIM, and this is the CIM definition standards. These are all the CIM documents are available for download from the CIM website at no charge there. So here we can see an example of what a mineral, the standard language in most of the definitions of a mineral resource here. Concentration or occurrence of a solid material economic interest in the Earth's crust in such a form or greater quality and quantity that there are reasonable prospects for eventual economic extraction. So note here that there are 3 E's in this definition and focus on eventual here. So this is we're just going to give an example of how some of the definitions differ. We'll see in a minute here. So these definition standards here are identical to those in CRISCO standards and in many of the other countries as well. But in an example of where there's a difference, here's the definition of a mineral resource in the SK 1300 document. A mineral resource is a reasonable estimate of mineralization taking into account relevant factors such as Earth's crust in such a form, grade, or quality and quantity that there are reasonable prospects for economic extraction. So note the difference here. There's only 2 E's in the definition, not 3. So the word eventual is omitted in this definition. So this is an example of how the definitions change or can be different between some of the different reporting codes. So here are the title pages of the reporting codes for the other countries. There's JORC, SAMREC. This is the SME, which, if I'm not mistaken, is or will soon be superseded by SK 1300. There's PERC, the European standards, and CBRR. These are the Brazilian standards there. So each of these codes and guides use standard definitions. They provide little guidance on the best practice for mineral exploration or the preparation of mineral MRMR estimates. So there they'll provide definitions, stage 1 in the process. They're relatively silent on the middle part, which is the practice. And then they provide some guidance on the reporting of the results. To my knowledge, there are only 2 countries in the world, Russia excluded for the moment, where there is guidance provided regarding the practice in respect of carrying out mineral exploration programs or the preparation of MRMR estimates. And in Australia, the guidance is provided via the AusIMM Guide to Good Practice 2014. It's a 2nd edition, monograph 30, and I'm not sure if there's been an update to it. And on the CIM side, here we have the CIM estimation of MR, mineral resource, mineral reserve best practices guidelines. This came out, updated version came out in November of 2019. So these, to my knowledge, are the only 2 documents in the world where practitioners can turn for guidance to answer questions regarding the preparation of mineral resource and mineral reserve estimates. I understand the Russians have the GKZ, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily available to the public, and I'm not sure if the Chinese have similar documents. I've never seen one for them. So each of the reporting documents here and templates also provide guidance for the public reporting of exploration results and mineral resource, mineral reserve estimates. The disclosure in these 5 documents is commonly accomplished via a checklist or table 1. It's a different form and format than either an SK 1300 report or a National Instrument 43-101 report. Table 1s are a little bit more abbreviated. They've got a very specific list of requirements of content to go into them, but they're generally quite more abbreviated than either the SK 1300 or the 43-101 reports. So in Canada, we do not allow disclosure of MRMR estimates or mineral exploration results via Table 1. In Canada, the disclosure must be done in accordance with National Instrument 43-101 and via Form 101F1. And in the United States, now we have the new disclosure standards via SK 1300 summary report, which superseded Industry Guide 7. So now we'll talk about practice, the distinction between practice and disclosure. In the Canadian system, the requirement to disclose technical and scientific information relating to a mineral property is provided via National Instrument 43101, which is, it's a securities law. It has the force of law. It's a securities instrument, securities law instrument. So it has the force of law behind it. And in the language of 43101, the CIM definition standards are incorporated by reference. So all the definitions of what a qualified person is, what a mineral is, what a mineral resource is, what a mineral reserve is, and the components therein, those are all part of the CIM definition standards. So they're incorporated by reference. So they have the same weight, the same requirement, the same weight of law behind them. That's for the disclosure. 43101 also has a companion policy. There's a separate document. It's a CP 43101 CP. And this is usually the bit after the main document. You have to get through 40, 50 pages to get to the end of it. So the companion policy is just that it discloses policy decisions or policy guidance related to 43101. And in the companion policy, there's reference made to the CIM best practices guidelines. So the companion policy does not have the weight of law. It's a policy document. So it's more of a should do, more of a guidance kind of a document, or provides information related to how decisions will be made based on stated policies here. So because the best practices guidelines are incorporated by reference into the policy document, they're also not law. They're more policy and guidance type of items. The document's more of a guidelines. But Canadian regulators may query disclosure that does not appear to conform with the industry best practices as outlined in the CIM best practices guidelines. So there's a distinction between law and policy for the disclosure. In the United States, the SK 1300 reports also have the weight of law. They are part of securities law. So this is a law. You must disclose results according to all of these requirements. But again, take note that when you go through the SK 1300 document, it provides all kinds of detail about disclosure, but it doesn't provide very much guidance about the practice of how to prepare resource and reserve estimates. Turning to the other reporting codes and templates in the world, these do not have the weight of law. In other words, the JORC code does not have Australian securities law behind it, or SAMREC, or PERC, or the CBRR reporting template. Rather, these documents are enabled via the stock exchanges. So these documents are given their authority through the various stock exchanges in these countries. So the Australian Stock Exchange will require disclosures in Table 1 according to the JORC code. So it's different from being a securities law, to my understanding. So again, in the Canadian structure, we actually fill in the gap between the definition standards and disclosure. So for a mineral exploration program, there are no real definition standards around mineral exploration. That part is blank. But we do have a best practices document, and that's available from the CIM website. We came out with an updated version in November of 2018. And disclosure of mineral exploration information results is governed under 43101 in Canada. And again, for MRMR estimation, we have definition standards, best practices, documents, and disclosure documents. In Canada, the definition standards and the best practices are administered under the mandate, or the CIM has the mandate to maintain and update the definition standards and the best practices. Whereas the provincial and territorial securities commissions have the mandate for maintaining the language regarding to the 43101 and the disclosure aspect. So here we have, in Canada, we have a break. Here we have securities law, which is administered by the various provincial and territorial securities commissions. And we have the CIM, which is charged with maintaining the definition standards and the best practices guidelines. So the best practices guidelines here provide general guidance on practice used for the preparation of MRMR estimates. So here there'd be practice guidance regarding, let's say, a drill hole database, how to prepare and maintain a drill hole database. There'll be guidance regarding modeling and estimation, and there'll be guidance for how to prepare a mineral resource statement. On the reserve side, there's guidance that basically says a reserve begins with a mineral resource estimate, then applies modifying factors, and we go into quite a lot of length in Chapter 7 describing the modifying factors, and end up with a mineral reserve statement. Now here I'm making a distinction between statements, resource statements and reserve statements, and disclosure. And what this dashed line is meant to illustrate is an invisible curtain. In my mind, resource and reserve statements, these are the tonnage and grade reports that are prepared by the QP for their own use as part of the estimation process, and for disclosure discussion internally within the various levels of companies. So your boss, the president, CEO, chair of the board, those sorts of things, but not the public domain. As soon as this information is disclosed to the public domain, 43101 kicks in, and that must be that disclosure must be governed under the format of an NI 43101 technical report. So there we have the distinction between practice and disclosure. So practice are all the steps regarding the preparation of a resource estimate. Disclosure is communication of the results to the public domain. So here we'll go into the best practices guidelines. So here copies are available at no charge from the CIM website. There we are, mrmrcim.org en. The Mineral Resource and Mineral Reserve Committee, we maintain a website that have all of these documents. And these are two of the documents of the more recent documents that we've put out. 2018 was the Mineral Exploration Best Practices Guidelines, 17 pages. And a year later in 2019, the Mineral MRMR BP Guidelines, 75 or 78 pages. And again, there's the link there and available at no cost from the CIM website. Compared to the AusIMM Monograph 30, I think it's about $300, $350, $400 to purchase that document. Last I knew. In regards to the various BP guidelines, best practices guidelines, our committee maintains a number of them. I've lost count to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, a rough dozen of various documents. So here's a status, a list of what the documents, which documents are available and what their status is. So starting in about this time in 2017, we began the update of the mineral exploration BP guidelines, and those came out in 2018. The updated MRMR BP guidelines, these are the general guidelines now, came out in 2019. More recently, Jen Hill and her team have been working for a number of years now to prepare a new document. This is an ESG guidance document. That document has gone through public peer review. So Jen and her group are just compiling the responses from that into the revised document, and that will get put towards CIM Council for approval, probably early in next year. We maintain industrial minerals best practices guidelines. The draft update is in progress. I'm expecting that one will be circulated for public comment probably early in 2023. Coal and uranium, we've just begun the process of updating those two documents, and remaining documents to be updated: laterites, lithium brines, placer deposits, potash, and rock-hosted diamonds. So we'll talk about the principle-based guidance regarding the BP guidelines. The founders, the crafters of the documents did not initially, when they first came out in 2003 or so, had no interest and no intention on providing detailed checklists of what you must do or what must be done in relation to the preparation of mineral resource, mineral reserve estimates. Rather, they elected to take the route of providing principle-based guidance to assist professional geoscientists or equivalent, and engineers or equivalent in carrying out their responsibilities relating to mineral exploration or MRMR estimates. So the guidance, the principle-based guidance are based on well-established principles and concepts that our colleagues are generally widely accepted through our industry. And again, importantly, the guidelines are not prescriptive. They cannot be. They cannot be detailed and prescriptive to provide detailed decisions for every possible variation, for every possible deposit. They're not designed to be prescriptive. They are designed to rely on the judgment and experience of the individual practitioners, so that there's some degree of flexibility to tailor the practices and procedures to the specific conditions of the deposit under consideration or the scenarios that are relevant at the time. So a bit of a mouthful here, but this is just an example of some of the language in the MRMR BP guidelines. This is from Chapter 7, 7.14.3.7 regarding preparation of an economic model. So generally, the section will begin with a statement of a principle. So here we discuss preparation of annual cash flows. Then there'll be a guidance section, which is intended to provide thoughts, guidance, information to the practitioners for carrying out that specific task. And often we strove to provide additional sources of information where people can go to get some more information if there are additional questions and additional topics to be covered. Again, the MRMR BP guidelines was 75 pages, and even at that, it took us 2 years to update that. We could not go into a lot of detail and have it be a shelf buster. So we took the route of providing additional guidance via references there. On the exploration side, the exploration BP guidelines. So here's an example of some of the guidance. This language speaks to the question of what to do for retaining drill samples, either core or chips or sample rejects. So the question comes up, often by exploration people is like, what do I do with my core once the program's finished? Can I throw it away or do I have to keep it? In Canada, the answer is it depends. And it depends on some jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions require the retention of all physical samples. Other jurisdictions do not provide any guidance. Either way, you can keep it if you want, you can discharge if you want. But also some closing thoughts. So basically it says in jurisdictions that do not regulate retention storage of these materials, the geoscientists should still consider any potential further uses of the material. So things like maybe, if there are going to be any need for metallurgical or geotechnical samples. So the retained materials could be of value at that point there. So there's just an example of some of the principles and some of the guidance available for that document. Some sources of additional information. Back to the CIM. The CIM maintains a library. The CIM website maintains a library and where there are sections available for the CIM Academy. So these cover various presentations from the AGMs and slide decks going back, I'm not sure how many years. So those are all available on the CIM Academy. Copies of the CIM journal are available. I think there are 4 issues a year come out for the CIM journal. So there are technical papers that are published in the CIM journal. There's also a repository of CIM technical paper library. There's conference proceedings, and there's links to OneMine, which I'm not exactly sure what OneMine is, but it's a portal for referencing geoscientific information digitally from a number of other websites. And these are all available to CIM members as part of your membership there. And also on the CIM page, you'll see a link for our committee's website there, where you can get copies of the best practices guidelines. There's a copy of the standards, best practices guidelines, evaluation, and links to CRISCO. So as an example of additional information, I'll put a plug in for a recent document that my colleague Bill Roscoe and I were fortunate to have published, accepted and published in the CIM journal in 2021, last year, last April 2021. This paper discusses the checkerboard effect. And basically, this is a follow-on, provides more information relating to Chapter 6.12.2 in the best practices guidelines that describes a reporting bias that often occurs if you're unwary, to the unwary, if they prepare mineral resource statements based on a simple block cutoff grade. In other words, report to me all tons in grade blocks above this level, and that can give you a very bad and very misleading answer. So this paper goes into that in a fair amount of detail. More recently, this was this April, this spring, my colleagues here are Luke Evans and Bill Roscoe again. We published our thoughts and opinions regarding the use of historical geoscientific information in mineral resource estimation. This speaks to the concept of whether or not historical information can be the source or can be used in the preparation of resource and reserve estimates, and the actions that can be taken by practitioners, QPs, to bring that information into current standards. So a little bit ahead of schedule here. So just to wrap up, here there are 3 components, again, to review. There are 3 components to mineral resource and mineral reserve estimation and disclosure. They are the definitions, estimates, and disclosure of results. And many countries, 13, 14 countries, have adopted a common set of standard definitions relating to mineral resource and mineral reserves. They're not all identical. There's some slight differences, but in the main, they're same or very similar language. Disclosure in Canada, the US, is accomplished by either NI 43101 or SK 1300, and in the remainder of the jurisdictions via Table 1 disclosure. And while many of those jurisdictions provide guidance relating to the disclosure and definitions, few provide guidance relating to practice. Only Australia and Canada provide guidance relating to the practice. Disclosure of information regarding a mineral property in Canada, United States is governed under securities legislation. And again, in Canada, this is done by a technical report, or in Canada, or in the US, it's by a technical report summary. And in our view, or in my view, both the 43101 reports and the SK 1300 reports generally provide an enhanced level of disclosure, more detailed, easier to understand, relative to a Table 1 summary, which is generally more abbreviated version of disclosure. And one of the key differences of our Canadian system is that we provide guidance to practitioners for the preparation of MRMR estimates by means of the best practices guidelines. And with that, well, we're done a little bit early. We'll turn it over to any questions.
I did see, I thought in the chat, there was a question. It was from Danielle about the principles of the process rather than mechanics. I have a question for you, Reno. Could you talk a little bit about what it means to be a QP? What does that process look like, and how does one become a QP or a competent person?
To my understanding, there's three components to it. The first component is education. So there must be a degree from a registered or a recognized university or educational institution. Second component is registration. So must be a member of a self-regulating body. Myself, I'm a member of the Professional Geoscientists of Ontario. And in the US, I think it's various states have their own registration. I've seen people registered in Wyoming or Texas or Colorado. Each state has its own registration. And the third aspect is experience. And in Canada, it's a minimum of 5 years of experience before becoming registered as a professional geoscientist. The experience item is a topic of discussion these days as to whether it's 5 years of experience from graduation or 5 years of experience after becoming registered with a member of a self-regulating organization. I don't think that question's been answered at the moment.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Does anyone else have questions? Please feel free to put those in the chat. We can also, if you raise your hand, I think we can unmute you. I'm not certain about that, but we can certainly try.
So we had a question on principle-based guidance.
Okay.
So the concept here is, I've not seen the document. I've only heard descriptions of it. In Russia, they have, and I can't pronounce it. I just know the letters. It's GKZ or Gukaza, from what I understand. There, it's very prescriptive. They have volumes, books and books and books of all the things that must be done to prepare a mineral resource and mineral reserve estimate according to the Russian standards. Very prescriptive. Every deposit type has its very detailed checklist of all the actions that must be carried out. The CIM best practices guidelines, we do not follow that model. It's more principle-based guidance. So we describe the principles involved and leave it to the practitioner, the QP, to come up with the specific actions to move forward to address those principles. Hope that makes sense.
And I did see one question in the chat that had to do with if you're a Canadian company, but you're operating, say, in Brazil or in the United States, do you go by Canada's rules or do you defer to the other country, or how does that work if you're, say, a Canadian company, but are operating in the US or somewhere else?
So I can't speak to any viewpoints or disclosure requirements on any of the other countries, but my understanding is that if there's disclosure made in a Canadian jurisdiction such that Canadian shareholders are likely to be affected, then the disclosure must be carried out under the requirements of 43101.
And then I see a question from John about asking if you have any insights to the ESG standards that are being prepared by CIM.
So I did assist in the preparation of that document, not as a technical subject matter expert, but more for general guidance and outlay. I can say that, I mean, this is a new document. It's a new area. It's a very complicated topic and very broad. The new document will focus on, it won't focus on the broader concept of ESG relating to corporate governance and the governance required at the corporate level. The document won't get up to that level. Rather, the language in the document focuses on those aspects relating to the ESG requirements of the modifying factors required of a mineral resource, mineral reserve estimate. So it's a much narrower scope. So focusing on the modifying factors. And at that, it's a 70 or 80 page document rather than the broader corporate governance type of a document, which is much longer, much broader topic.
And just a quick follow-up, I noticed there's a comment from, goodness here, I'm not catching a name, Abani, from Abani Samal, regarding state registration in the United States. The PG registration typically isn't recognized to be a CPQP under NI 43101 or under the CRISCO family of codes. There's some reasons for that. So when you're looking into being a QP or a CP, you really need to make sure that you understand what set of requirements you're going to be working under, whether it's part of the CRISCO family of codes, NI 43101 or SK 1300, and then reach out directly either to an expert with one of those organizations or to your local professional organization. We can certainly help you try to understand whether or not you possess that membership piece that Reno laid out. You have the education experience and then the membership in a body that can hold you to specific professional and ethical guidelines.
In 43101, there is a list of recognized professional organizations, RPOs.
Yep.
And I haven't looked at it in a while, but my understanding is that the various states are recognized, but I could be wrong. But I
can't speak to the NI 43101. I was just repeating what Abani said, but I can speak to CRISCO, and at this time under the CRISCO family of codes, individual state registrations in the U.S. have not been recognized as yet. That could change, of course. Are there any other questions? Well, with that, then, Reno, thank you so much for an enlightening and interesting presentation. I do appreciate you taking time out of your day to share your expertise and experience with us. I invite everyone to come back January 31st for the next AIPG Lunch and Earn. That will be Abani Samal. He'll address the international nature of the minerals industry. I see Abani's with us today. So Abani, thank you for providing that webinar. And just a quick reminder that we will be off at the end of December, and we'll pick back up January 31st. So with that, I thank you again. Thank you, Reno, for your time and effort.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everyone.